we moved here about 10 years ago, I immediately read in the Gazette about this thing called town meeting and was just drawn in. I said, really? Really? Running a town with 240 neighbors who get together and decide the largest, most critical decisions? And that's exactly what happens. And I tell you, when I first moved here, the town was voting on whether to keep town meeting. 350-year-old institution. I mean, it's been around. This is a core engine of New England. And town meeting was held up by 11 votes. Talk about small town politics.
Wow.
So the turnout was high, and it came down to 11 votes, which I think were 11 kids from a dorm in UMass. But nonetheless, voters. And so we still have town meeting.
Yeah. So it's because when you say that it's a New England tradition, I mean, we can interpret that in different ways. My interpretation is that we're squabblers, you know.
We are squabblers. In fact, Amherst was formed of squabbling. Amherst was created. There was 18 families in this part of Hadley. We were part of East Hadley, and they were upset with Isaac Chauncey, who was the preacher in Hadley, and they stopped paying taxes to him for his salary. And they petitioned the King's Court in Boston and said, we want our own church. And so they created the East Hadley Parish, and that eventually, they didn't even like the name Hadley, and it eventually became its own town of Amherst. So it came of a squabble.
Mm-hmm. And we've been carrying on that tradition ever since.
Ever since. Actually, when they tried to build the first church, it took them 4 years to come up with an appropriate site.
Yeah.
And they chose 6 different sites. One was where Amherst College is today, next to John Nash's Tavern. One was where Antonio's is today. One was on the East Common. Town meeting kept on voting for a new site for their church every year, and it took 4 years until they finally decided on the original.
Yeah.
And I was reading this in the history books, and it could have been from last week.
Yeah, it seems familiar. Yeah. So it may not be efficient, but it's thorough and kind of a...
It's really true, and that's one of the arguments. I think a lot of people, I'm on the fence of town meeting. I think it's a fascinating institution. I see a lot of great benefits. I also see that the detractors of town meeting would say it's incredibly inefficient and incredibly slow and incredibly drawn out. There's a part of me that says, is efficiency really what you're looking for in your civic decisions? Not sure it's the number one priority.
Yeah. Right. Well, it does bring people together. I have a grandfather, short one. I have a grandfather who made a series of maybe questionable financial decisions late in his life. He had 4 children. And it later emerged that part of the reason that he was making these moves was this was a great way to get all his children together so they could kind of bitch and moan about what a terrible father he was being, There's something to be said for that.
There is something. It brings people together. I mean, in any crisis, which is any potential of weak in Amherst from a civic perspective.
Right, okay.
The good thing is that there's opinions everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a great thing. I think that's why town meeting's so powerful and so interminatingly long and arduous.
Epic.
Because everybody's got an opinion. You can't swing a cat in this town without hitting a different opinion.
Yeah, and you're a man who's tried, right?
I have swung that cat. You mentioned the word parking.
Yes.
People's heads explode. You mentioned student housing.
Yeah.
People have there's very few people in the middle on parking.
Yeah, let's talk about parking just briefly here. Let's swing a cat. I mean, so what's the parking situation? I noticed that we decided to pave the common.
Walmart's coming?
No.
On the common?
Really?
I think, wasn't that in front of town meeting this year? I thought it was.
You're pulling my leg.
See, you were watching town meeting on ACTV.
I'm an easy sucker. Parking. We do have this garage there. There's like 1 million tons of cement in there or something or other. And
there was, it was just before I moved here, but I've talked to so many people who were involved, in the amount of civic effort it took to construct a parking garage that doesn't go above the ground.
Yeah.
was amazing. And there's people that I've talked to who are involved on both sides of that issue who are epic anti-parking people and epic pro-parking people. And some of these people, I'm not going to get involved in Amherst anymore just because of the stance on parking.
Yeah.
And the thing about all of these issues, whether it's student housing, parking, really anything, school start times, another one, you go across the board and everybody's got an opinion and everybody has some truth in their opinion and everybody is right to some degree in their perspective.
Well, I don't agree with that, but
You think about it for parking. I mean, there's people who don't want to build more parking because they have a long view of the world and they feel that we really need to get rid of cars.
Yeah.
I mean, really, we don't want to build more parking because we want to get rid of cars. Now, that's a really long view.
Very long.
And it doesn't really help the guy who has a shop who needs a place for his customer to park.
Right.
But there's something to be said for that.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned to me an idea that you had, and I don't know just how sort of pie in the sky this was, but you had this vision of maybe, and this is maybe another one of those very long views of taking all of North Pleasant Street north of like the subway there, and turning that whole thing into a pedestrian mall.
Yeah, I think I was actually just up in Burlington a couple weeks ago, and that whole Church Street, which was one of their main drags. It's now a pedestrian mall, and it's an awesome place.
Yeah.
But of course, to do that, you'd have to build more parking.
Right.
Because people would have to park somewhere so that they could walk.
That's right. Okay. All right. So,
There's always something.
And what else do we have here? I mean, part of what I like about politics is not just the nitty-gritty and give and take, which is always fun, but it's where the big ideas kind of hit the road, and we can talk about that because we have, right now we have very little sort of governmental responsibility, and we can just kind of flap our lips about whatever we want. Which is
Well, that's the Amherst tradition.
Yes, that's why we're here. Kendrick Park, and another enormous resource.
Beautiful, beautiful park. Lots of ideas, and that's the thing about Amherst. And again, one of the fantastic things about our town is that there's so many great ideas. So when the town put together the master plan process, 1,000 people, fully 1,000 people were involved in putting together the master plan. There were meetings everywhere. And Kendrick Park was one that was very specific. There's a creek that's running under Kendrick Park. One of the ideas is to expose that creek, put a nice bridge over it. There's a design for an amphitheater so there can be an outdoor performance space. There's no shortage of ideas. The key is when these ideas hit the ground, and we've got to make decisions, and that's when the process gets really interesting.
Right.
And that's where town meeting, gets involved, and 240 people come together to make that single decision. It's like Frank Burns from MASH. Remember MASH?
Sure.
Frank Burns said, "I'm all for individuality as long as we do it together."
Yeah, I'm of all the people to quote, Frank Burns. Huh?
Yeah,
Okay.
That's the appropriate
Okay,
one.
so I mean, I'd love to talk more about this, but we're running short on time. How can people get involved if they do want to get involved? Should they get involved? Maybe they should run.
They completely should get involved. I mean, that's really the great thing about living in a small town, right? Is that the entire town is really run by the citizens. It's the decisions are made, the actual feet on the ground. There's 42 different committees in town. There used to be 70. The town manager and the select board has done a great job of narrowing that down a little bit. Yeah. But if it really depends on what you love. If you love sewers, the sewer commission. Seriously, if you feel about water quality, if arts are your thing, there's the arts council. If the elderly is something you want to work on, there's the council on the elderly. There's the shade tree commission if you love landscaping. The shade tree commission is made. Town meeting approved the purchase of 2,000 new trees for the town of Amherst, which are being planted.
Were the trees involved in that decision? Or?
They were not. They were not. This is not a communist state.
Yeah, only the trees are silent.
That's right. That's right.
I want you to join me in thanking Bear for stopping by. Please give him a warm round of applause.
In the morning, in the backyard, a chair to wonder how life got so small. Could this be all there is? Through the screen door, cups and saucers chirping like birds. Well, she'll be okay. I can get away for a while. 'Cause something's gnawing, it's always nagging. I gotta do something before it's too late.